$15 minimum wage. But is that a good idea? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Democrats in the House of Representatives are pushing for a $15 federal minimum wage. But first, remember to like this episode, subscribe to our channel, and support us at patreon.com/AmericaUncovered so we can pay our staff more than minimum wage. You know, I remember my first minimum wage job. It was at Mrs. Fields Cookies, and each shift I earned 2 cookies and a Coke, plus any cookies that broke. Okay, I also earned $6.75 an hour, which after taxes was worth about 2 cookies and a Coke, plus any cookies that broke. What's that, Shelley? No, I didn't break the cookies. Sometimes the cookies just broke on their own. Get off my back. Anyway, back to the minimum wage. One of President Biden's campaign promises was to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Here's what he said shortly before taking office.
There should be a national minimum wage of $15 an hour. No one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line. That's what it means. If you work for less than $15 an hour and work 40 hours a week, you're living in poverty.
I think most people would agree that you shouldn't be living below the poverty line if you work full-time. The problem is, what Biden said is not true. Here's why. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the poverty threshold for a single individual under the age of 65 is an annual income of less than roughly $13,500. For a household of 2, it's about $17,500. For a family of 4, it's about $26,500. If you made $15 an hour and you worked full-time, let's say 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year, you would earn $30,000 a year. That's well above the federal poverty threshold for even a family of 4. Even if you only made $10 an hour, you'd make more than the poverty threshold for a family of 2. And at the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, you would make about $1,000 more than the poverty threshold for a single person. Actually, the minimum wage for most people in the U.S. is more than $7.25 an hour. I'll tell you why in a minute. But maybe your main takeaway from what I just showed you is that, wow, the poverty line is really low. Which is why some people use another measure for poverty, known as being near poverty, or the working poor. This is commonly defined as double the federal poverty threshold. Using these numbers, the current federal minimum wage would put you in near poverty, and $15 an hour would be enough to support one person above that, but not a family of 4. That's why people who support a minimum wage hike say that the minimum wage should be a living wage. A living wage is defined as enough to cover a person's basic needs. So how much is a living wage? MIT calculates that for a family of 4 with 2 working adults, each adult would have to make about $16.50 an hour. But that's not a great measure either, because a living wage is very different in, say, New York City than somewhere like Alfalfa County, Oklahoma. And yes, that's a real place. They grow a lot of wheat. Like I said earlier, a $15 federal minimum wage was one of President Biden's campaign promises, and Democrats in the House of Representatives have included it in the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill that they're sending to the Senate. According to the Raise the Wage Act, the federal minimum wage would gradually increase over the next 5 years until it hits $15 an hour in 2025. After 2025, the minimum wage would keep going up according to the median hourly wage. The same goes for the 14C wage, which is the wage paid to workers with disabilities that affect their job performance. The bill would also raise the tipped minimum wage for workers who also get tips, like waiters, and the youth minimum wage. That's a lower wage that applies to workers under 20 years old during the first 90 days of their employment. Both would equal the regular minimum wage by 2027. The fact that the House is including raising the minimum wage in the coronavirus relief bill is a little awkward, though. That's because the Senate voted last week not to raise the minimum wage during the pandemic. That's because of the impact it could have on small businesses that are already struggling because of the pandemic. But not to worry. The Democrats could still get a $15 minimum wage through Congress even without any Republican support. That's through the magic of budget reconciliation. Reconciliation is a special process that allows the Senate to pass a bill with just 51 votes instead of 60. But it can only be applied to budgets, not other bills. It's unclear if Democrats can squeeze the $15 minimum wage thing into a budget and pass it through reconciliation. But they're going to try. And if they try, then it will be up to the Senate parliamentarian to decide whether the bill qualifies as a budget bill. And if that doesn't work, there's pressure on Biden to go nuclear. For more on that, stay tuned after the break. Welcome back. If Congress doesn't get a $15 minimum wage passed through the normal procedure, there's pressure on President Biden to go nuclear. And by going nuclear, Politico means that Biden would have Vice President Harris overrule the Senate parliamentarian, something that hasn't happened in 40 years. Hey, does anyone remember the last time the Democrats went nuclear in the Senate? They got rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees, which then came back to bite them. But this might all be a moot point, because it's possible that not enough Democrats in the Senate even support a $15 minimum wage. And Biden himself said that it was unlikely to pass in the COVID relief bill. But he's still going to push for it later. Like I said earlier, the current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, and it's been that since 2009. But very few people actually earn that little. Fewer than 2% of hourly paid workers actually earn the federal minimum wage, according to the Labor Department. One reason is because so many businesses pay more than the minimum wage, because they want to retain good employees. Another reason is that most states already have their own minimum wages that are above the federal minimum wage. No states currently have a minimum wage as high as $15 an hour yet, although several states will raise their minimum wage to $15 over the course of the next few years. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the $15 federal minimum wage would lift about 0.9 million people out of poverty, but 1.4 million workers would lose their jobs. In other words, for every 2 people lifted out of poverty, 3 people would lose their jobs. And a disproportionate number of them would be younger, less educated workers. Supporters of a $15 minimum wage say it will raise the pay of 32 million workers, lift people out of poverty, reduce income inequality, stimulate the economy through more consumer spending, and reduce government spending on welfare programs. Opponents of the $15 minimum wage say it will cause job losses, reduce income as businesses cut employee hours, raise prices for consumers, disproportionately hurt small businesses, and depress economic growth. But what does the data say? Well, it's complicated. We've never seen a nationwide minimum wage increase this big this quickly. And because raising the minimum wage has so many ripple effects on the economy, it's possible to find studies that support both sides. And an even bigger problem is that economists don't even agree on what the research as a whole says. In fact, according to a recent study, even the broad summaries of the research are sharply different. Some economists say the research shows little negative effects, or shows the effects are so mixed it doesn't really make a difference. And as support for a $15 minimum wage has grown, there's been an increasing attempt to downplay any possible negative effects, like job losses. and even to say there are no negative employment effects at all. But according to this study, that doesn't reflect the reality of the research, which shows more negative employment effects, especially for teens, young adults, less educated workers, and low-wage workers. That doesn't cancel the potential positive outcomes of raising the minimum wage. But if we only look at information that supports raising the minimum wage or downplays the negative effects, are we making a good decision? Especially when the data shows that it could actually hurt the people at the bottom, the people it's supposed to help the most. What if Mrs. Fields had decided that young Chris wasn't worth $15 an hour, and then she replaced him with a cookie-selling robot instead? That would be stupid, because the robot wouldn't even enjoy the cookies that broke on their own. So what do you think of the federal minimum wage increase? Let me know in the comments below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.